apart from Rasheed, everybody that's spoken has been white. Rasheed, you were very instrumental in putting together the group of people that were talking today. Do you have a political? Do you have a?
You guys talk about
that. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, the only reason I'm saying that is because I think it's really important that you know that the choice of people that spoke was made by
you were saying earlier. I'm just wondering how you yourself talking about decolonisation in your institutes, then are working through that in an everyday, in your everyday lives, whereas for people of colour, we're forced to.
Yeah. Okay.
I think my answer will not please you, because you were expecting here some black faces.
No, I didn't have any expectation. I'm wondering about the process of decolonisation within institutions and how we're perpetuating that often with having exclusively white speakers. And I'm wondering how that process of decolonisation, especially with what was presented by the gentleman down here, which was again this mental acrobatics that I'm sure I'll be disappointed because I don't know the answers, but I'm trying to work out how it seemed to me like we could almost bypass whiteness or discussing whiteness because of the paradox of race itself, but actually, if we don't have those discussions and for deep and I'm just wondering how we go about this.
Why are you looking at their faces rather than what the faces are saying?
Well, I was listening to what they were saying. Absolutely. And that's why I picked up on the point about.
How can you produce an emancipation quality based on a fictive category like race? It's a simple philosophical question that I get.
Look,
John, can I just make sure that you finished your sentence because you were interrupted? Okay. I mean, I think that, so I think we probably all have very different questions, both to the question of how we are decolonising or involved in processes of coloniality, because like Charles Escher, I don't think, I think that for me particularly, I don't think we can talk about decolonisation. I think we're still in a process of imperial coloniality. And I think the point was made very strongly in Escher's talk. But personally, I think that it's a consistent fight all the time for us to attempt to do so, but it's a fight that it often ends in failure, in disavowal and disappointment. And it's often something that is institutionally very difficult to fathom, partially because institutional power is a construct that is as fictional and as frightening as race is in terms of the way that John's described race. This is for me personally. So I run an institute called B times NU, which is a collaboration between Baltic and Northumbria University, and it's steeped in colonial reciprocities and reanimations. Every day the doors open. Okay, and it's sitting within Newcastle, which is a very particular racial history, and I'm living in London and moving to Newcastle, so in myself, I'm also involved in a coloniality, So but what we have to do, in terms of my response to you, is certainly not put together panels on the basis of skin colour, but understand each other try to understand the difficult questions and conversations that come about, and particularly the things that we think we don't agree with and we don't understand. I mean, I've got loads and loads of questions for Stephen Wright about his paper, you know, and I'm grappling, thinking, God, do I really believe that, or and I'm having to sit with that. It's kind of jiggling around inside my body.
As well.
Can I put,
You mean because I'm white and you're black?
can I put that thing differently? What I understood from you, that there should have been some black person among those who presented papers.
I was asking.
Yeah.
There's no expectation. I know it might have sounded like I had an expectation, but there was no expectation.
But the implication of your question is, there should have been a black face as well.
It's a very valid question.
Can you suggest somebody who should have been here who is absent? Can you? Who?
Oh, could I say somebody?
Yeah.
Well, somebody from the other story, or from the work that we, so possibly a peer, or I mean, but I could draw up a long list.
I mean, maybe I should also just, I think it's a valid, very valid question. I mean, given the work upstairs, the issues that it addresses. Of course, it's very striking there was not a person of colour speaking. I think whenever I've had a conversation with Rasheed about how people to write about his work, talk about his work, I, in my very wary and nervous of my whiteness, have always said, okay, Rasheed, you know, we need to talk about this person, probably because on the basis of race instead of ideas at certain moments. Rasheed has always corrected. No, I know, but you have always corrected me and said that's not the right person to talk about the work or to talk about the ideas, whether that's a white person or a black person. So when Rasheed makes a comment about listening to the person's ideas, it's when he talks about it, it's absolutely genuine. And I do it as a white person, very nervous and wary of my whiteness and what it means to put together a white panel for Rasheed Araeen retrospective. It's a very different thing. And so I think, sorry, just one tiny thing. I think listening to John's talk is also difficult for me to listen to because it is very, not from a philosophical point of view, but from a practical person, as a white curator working in a white institution, to talk about or accept the idea that we can dismiss race. No, sorry. No, sorry. Sorry.
Because universal emancipation of race lines has to be mediated by race. So anti-racist practices have to engage with forms of racism. However, race is a fictive category.
Sorry.
We don't live in a world where we can discard that.
Yeah. No, sorry. I absolutely.
That brings us to a question Andrea wrote as a response to John, saying, what did John think about the Black Art Movement? Black Art Movement wasn't about blackness as identity. It was about racism and imperialism. It was only later on then question of identity entered as a result of some theorists, post-colonial theorists like Homi Bhabha and Trubadhan.
So, John, I wasn't proposing that you were proposing that we disregard race.
Hold on, John. I just want to. Can I just say, John, wait for a minute. I'm going to give you the microphone in a minute, okay, rather than shouting. I mean, I know I'm shouting, but I'm here, you're there. I just wanted to say, back to the question that you've asked that's raised this, I think that the reason I said that I think it was more complicated was because actually you're asking about how we decolonize institutions, yeah? That was within...
You're thinking about representation
yeah.
within the space, so then it depends on who attends, who's in the audience, and who gets to speak. So
yeah.
That's the basis.
But I'd like to move. I want to, you know, John wants to talk, and so we should. Where's the microphone? If we could bring that down. But I do want to go back to this question because I think it's a. I mean, whilst it's not the subject of this symposium exactly, because we're talking about Rasheed Araeen's. But at the same time, it's absolutely invoked by the work and by us being together in the rooms. I think you're right. So maybe we could come back to this question about, you know, what do we mean when we say, how do we decolonize the institution? Because it's something that's been invoked many, many times. And it's something that I've asked for and demanded, you know, as a white woman, you know, to use these terms. But at the same time, there's a very long process and it's very complicated. And it's certainly not just about putting black people on stage and having white people in the audience. That seems to be clear to me, although that might be a stage in the process. So I think that it's important that we really complicate that question as well. But John, would you...
I was doing some basic historical recovery work. There was a generation of black novelists in the US who did not want to be known as black writers. They wanted to be known as writers who happened to be black. And in that, they made an explicit identification between race and racism. So they wanted to exit the category of race on those terms. But that did not mean that they thereby abdicated their responsibilities as critics of racism in practice. And all the authors I cite, from Schuyler up into Bentley, are engaged with this question. They're engaged with the possible relationship between black modernism and universalism, which is the key theme of Rasheed's work. So I took us back to the 1930s in order to reflect on our current situation.
Michelle back there, and while the microphone's going there, I think it might be quite useful to remember that in Nick's paper earlier on today, Nick talked about Michael Newman, another white bloke, Michael Newman's idea of critical universalism, which I think, I mean, is quite an interesting position around this, whether, I mean, I have some problems with it, but I think it's also an interesting position. Michelle.
I just wanted to return to the possibility of the reproduction of whiteness, but also to think about something that Rasheed did for artists of colour back in the early 80s in terms of knocking on the door at the Arts Council to take account for the paucity of visibility for artists. And my question is it doesn't go fast enough, we understand that because we live it, and to respond, yes, there are moments in which I wish to emancipate myself from the conditions of the skin that I'm in, or the body I'm in, but it won't go away, and I don't want it to go away. But I want to ask you, Rasheed, if you would talk about some of the work that you did in the beginning to try to speak to the bigger power about representation on a level of parity versus on a level of tokenism.
Particularly in relation to the other story, or?
Specifically with fundraising. I think to simplify my question here, I'm just asking about the moment in which you had to directly confront the institutional power, specifically with fundraising for a project like The Other Story, how to even tackle that, because I think we are still tackling those conditions. And I want to say that, yes, I can theoretically go along with the idea of race as a fictive construct, but as a lecturer at Goldsmiths, I also have to experience the lived realities of students that physically are living the burden of race, even as a construct. So I guess I'm asking about the fight for fundraising, really, because that's still the issue today for the students and for artists like myself or Jade.
If you could talk a little bit about the conversations with the Arts Council, the South Bank Centre, in terms of getting the money, getting the resources to realise the other story. And you could maybe begin by saying what it was, a 12-year conversation, a 12-year story to arrive at the other story.
Can you repeat the question?
Michelle was asking if you could talk about the conversations and struggle and challenges you faced in trying to get money out of the Arts Council to realise the other story.
Oh, see, it was very tough, difficult. When I approached Art Council in, I think, end of 70s, they just dispersed what I was proposing. Because they said, well, we had some artists who were successful in the 50s, there are some in the collection, so what the hell you're talking about? In a way, the attitude of the Art Council was understandable because they had their own agenda, they had own perception. What I was proposing, it went about their own things. So they said no. Even when I wanted to set up an archive, because I thought just asking something from the institution wouldn't be enough. We have to do something ourselves, materially. So I began collecting material in order to set up an archive so that I can say, look, this is what is missing. Even then, I didn't get any support from the unconscious. Why then they came in 87 to support the project? It was because the whole political situation had changed. Beginning with the riots, uprising of black people in the major cities of the UK, Manchester and Birmingham, London, and Bristol, and political establishment began to worry. So they appointed somebody, I think, Lord Scotland, something like that, to investigate why there is so much anger and discontentment among the black population, by which I mean both Asian and of African people. His conclusion was It wasn't political, it wasn't economic, it wasn't unemployment, it was cultural. Because the establishment has been ignoring their own cultures, by which they meant traditional cultures. He proposed the solution, that is, the government should fund what became so-called ethnic minority arts. In 86, Mrs. Thatcher, who hated so-called other cultures, asked our council to spend, I think, about 10% of our council budget on ethnic minority arts. So there was a change taking place within the institution. So when I went to our council in 87, it was in this political atmosphere that they accepted my proposal, thinking they would use my proposal to promote their own agenda. That's exactly what happened. Since then, because there was no further development coming out of the other story.
When you were putting on the exhibition and engaging with the Arts Council, did you therefore feel that your project was fulfilling this funding criteria that the Thatcher government had set, or was there a genuine interest in what you were trying to do?
Even in the last few years, when a publicly funded institution is under obligation to follow the government agenda of diversity, and that's how they begin to acquire the works of black artists, that means of Asian and African origin. And they begin to get every Tom, Dick, and Harry who was, according to them, black, without any criteria of art. While state was doing this, they put on show so-called conceptual art in Britain, 2016, which was exclusively of white artists. Despite the fact not white artists were on the forefront of the shift into conceptual art in the city.
But that could be justified because
When I asked Andrew Wilson how you explain this exclusion, he said it is to do with some kind of modernism and how these artists have been responded. When I said, you mean I was not responding to modernism, he went silent and there was no further discussion.
No, I'm sorry. It's not. It was just that it could be justified in the same reason because from that selection viewpoint, that would be their definition of modernism because they don't know anything else. That was it. Sorry, And that happens all the that still continues.
No, Andrew Wilson was right that modernism being a colonial subject, that means white subject, only white artists could respond critically to modernism. That means we were out. Whatever we did, it was not legitimized the crucial of Eurocentrism. So there is a logic of colonialism. It is not build that logic. Institutions, even today, run on that logic. They are not because they are Nazi people. They are against black people. But they have the logic of colonialism which they can't confront because until whole society is prepared to confront that logic, nothing will happen in the institution. About 2 years ago, there was a survey in Britain, and 70% people said colonialism was good for those who were colonized. So that is the situation we still live. So we have to look at the broader picture rather than just accusing the institutions.
Charles.
Thanks, Rasheed. I want to come back with great hesitancy, I have to say, to some of the questions that you've been raising, and really it's more a response to the discussion which troubles me in a way between you and John here in relation to this question of race is fiction, which I think is even hard to say, I think, in some ways. And it seems to me that if we allow ourselves the idea of double ontologies at the moment, it might help us a little bit out of the. I don't know whether it helps us out, and I think you have to judge that in a way. But there is, in a sense, race is fiction. It has two. Sorry, as a fictive category. What should I say? Race is a fictive category. Race is fictive. Okay. Yes, then I'll try and address it with some assiduity, which is a big challenge for me anyway. But this question of race as fictive does have, within the classically white supremacist modernity coloniality structure, a very strong purchase. Because often a modernist, and maybe Andrew Wilson would sort of subscribe to this in some way, would say that they're only addressing the work in terms of its quality, and its quality being racially blind. In other words, that there's an address to whatever work that's produced. And I'm sure that Herbert Reed would assign himself an understanding of race as fictive in his address to the art that he's writing about. Race is not an issue which he understands to be of substantial concern for his analysis of art history. And I think when you read Herbert Reed, and I'm sure when I read Herbert Reed, then we understand that as complete bullshit, yeah, as a position which is completely unsustainable.
This is a utopian moment in.
But let me. Can I just finish, because I've only done one of the double ontologies, yes. And then you're criticizing me for half an argument. Yeah. That's a bit harsh.
Right, hold on.
No, it's a bit harsh, because if there's a double ontology, there are two sides.
Just go on, carry on.
Okay. So that's true. The other way is that the question of modernity coloniality, as that we were talking about, and the question of decoloniality are not, I don't think, issues, or are issues which we have to understand at some level as universal. They're not issues which attract only a particular racial community to be able to speak about. Yeah? you and I are as colonial as each other. We have different experiences of that modernity and coloniality, but we are as subject to it as each other, which is 100%, I would say. There is nothing outside of that in our experience. There might be a speculation of it, and this is where it comes in, I think. That then if there is a speculation of escaping for a moment from this modernity coloniality, which I think is what decoloniality might offer, but decoloniality is a profound transformation, it's not a brand label. It's not, what I was saying, Frieze does a decolonial issue, but the publisher of Frieze has an OBE, is a member of the British Empire. Yeah? And that's unsustainable. To be a British imperialist and to be a decolonial is unsustainable. One has to give. And I think we know in the case of Frieze that the decolonial will give and the imperial will not. But clearly, if we are to address the decolonial, then the imperial has to give. And the imperial has to give for you and for me, sorry, the other way around, for you and for me, for black and for white and for Asian and for everybody else. Yeah? It's a universal experience, experienced very differently, but universally experienced. And I think then the fictive race offers the possibility of an escape from the modern colonial construction, the matrix of power, that there's an escape which that might offer. So there's both the Herbert Reed, if you want to call that, notion of the race as fictive, and the possibility of a genuine universalism, a universalism perhaps that relates to geometry, a universalism which is not racial, which I think does lie in the ruins of that modern, and lies in the ruins of the Alhambra, and lies in the ruins of cultures from South America and from Africa and from Australia. And everywhere probably has always existed as within human society. That drive for emancipation, for social equity, for justice, that has always existed in every human society alongside all the oppression, I would guess.
Charles, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
It's not because I'm not extraordinarily interested in what you're saying, as you know, but we've got 2 more questions and limited time. Somebody, no, you can't, I'm sorry, we can't, I'm really sorry. There's 2 people that haven't spoken who want to speak. Could we have the microphone up here, and then there's somebody over here. If you could make your questions or statements relatively short. Sorry.
Hi. I'd like to move the conversation away from these questions about modernism and modernity and refocus on radical interventions into the institution and institutionalization. And I'm thinking a lot about the conversations that Rasheed Araeen had with David Madalla in the 70s about institutions as living structures. I'd like to think in particular about the intervention represented and propelled by performance and innovations in performance. And particularly that was a movement that was led by women and people of colour. And I think it would be really great to think about Rasheed Araeen's legacies in terms of, not only in terms of the specific generational boundary of the 1970s and beyond, and the milieu of that time, but also thinking about people like Mona Hatoum and Sonia Boyce, Ori Ashery, emerging generations of performance artists like Susan Butler, Tanya El-Khoury, and Project O, and what they represent. And so there's a lot of things going on, but what I'm talking about is different notions of visibility that are produced in the formal innovation of performance. So there's a lot of things, but perhaps Rasheed Araeen, you could start by talking about why you turned to performance in particular and what that offered in terms of formal innovation, but also a political intervention into the institution.
Thank you. But Rasheed, before you answer that, I'm going to ask the woman over here to ask her question, and then Rasheed has time to process. Sorry, Sam. Sorry, I didn't want to. Time managing.
Hi, sorry,
Thank
not
you.
a question, just more of a thought
Yes,
coming out
great.
of what Jade was talking about, which is in terms, and what Charles was talking about in terms of decoloniality, the different aspects of how we all imbricated into it. But that also generates different experiences, different lived experiences, and therefore that generates different knowledges. And I think that is actually what Jade was trying to say about in terms of the color of the panel, in terms of how representative of different knowledges of the same thing. I think I might be wrong, but that's my kind of, that's it.
Thank you. Sarah, and then Rasheed.
I don't want to lose the question about performance.
I'll try to keep this quite rapid.
Yeah.
I think
I just think I was trying to keep quiet because I think it's really important as the director of institution, you sit back and listen to a lot of these discussions. But it was, I think, just as a quick thing, because for us it's a really, really critical issue, and part of why I wanted to position the collaboration with Banaba and have Rasheed not just on his own terms as a fantastic exhibition, but also because of, I suppose, the way it opened up some of the issues that Charles has been talking about in terms of actually how we are working, how I'm working with my curatorial team in taking a narrative forward. And therefore, for me, when I was quite, I was very hesitant, I was quite resistant, I was quite angry at first about having an all-white panel. Because, and I suppose, but when it came down to it, we really talked it through and we really thought about it. It was about saying we also need to open up the space. And it felt almost like, so a lot of the things that we are also challenging is this kind of, you know, the kind of case for diversity arts council agenda, where things do become within a lot of institutional structures just now around this ticking of something. And so in a sense, you know, we're very focused in this next single 12 months alone. We have significant new commissions from a whole cross, you know, in terms of age, we have Zinzi Minotti, a young black performance artist from London. We have a new commission from Barbie Asante. We have new commissions from Ingrid Pollard. We have new commissions from Joy Lubino. We have Shuti Babizwas. So to me, that enabled me to be more comfortable with this, because this, to in effect, I felt I was going to be forcing something because, and I understand that my uncomfortableness is really similar, I think, to your uncomfortableness. And I just felt it was important to acknowledge that this notion of how you decolonize institutions like this I suppose my greatest fear is it's done by trying to make it look visibly decolonized without systemically changing any of the structures. So to me, what felt very important, and coming into an institution actually that has quite a short history. So it's not a big museum that's embedded in a long narrative, but actually the projects and exhibitions that have primarily been shown here have been by white, male, American artists as well, but there's this wonderful narrative that comes through. So I suppose for us that became the bigger, more important, longer term issue but also because there are a lot of issues, and I think particularly about the real complexity for the left about the issues of identity politics, which can take us down dead ends. We need to begin to position how we think about that, even if it's not another 10 years till we get there. And I think for me, just as that was part of that. Sorry.
Thank you. Sarah Munro, she always says she's going to be quick, but she never is. Right. We're asking Rasheed to respond to the question about performance, and with that, or intervention, let's call it not performance, but intervention. Rasheed, can you talk to this question around intervention, performative intervention? Again, that's, to quote Stephen, fashionable 10 years ago. But could you...
I never called myself as a performance artist.
No, that wasn't implied, yeah.
Because I don't believe in this category, performance artist, painter, sculptor, conceptual art. So whenever I could not express myself or deal with whatever confronted with through painting, sculpture, or writing, I would turn to performance. The female performance of Pakibasra was how shall I put this? It came about as a result of request by David Midar. I had not done any performance for some time, and David knew I had done some in the past. As artist for democracy was closing down, he asked me, Rasheed, you must do performance. I said, no, David, I'm not interested. I've given now. I'm doing something else. I'm not interested in performance. He kept on insisting. So when I went home, after having this talk with David, I began to think what David was asking me. So I said to myself, maybe David was right. I should do a performance. But what performance? But the question. So while I was thinking about performance, and many things began to come into my head, my family back in Pakistan, my visit to Brick Lane in the 60s and 70s, how things have changed in Brick Lane, and there was a strike in northwest London, mainly about Asian women against the factory owned by Indian. Greenwich was one of the longest strikes in the working class struggle. So all these things began to come into my head. The question was how to put them together. So in the end, I said I couldn't perform myself, just go in front of the audience, do some act. I had to introduce into it of Brick Lane, my family, Pakistan, how I think about them, how I sometimes meet them, and the roadmap itself. It was a very difficult, what did I say, whole thing. However, I managed and brought them all these struggles together. My own, because I put myself in the performance, as well as what was happening in the Brick Lane, and how Pakistani, Bangladeshi mostly were being targeted by skinheads. And there were some killings in Brick Lane. And the railway strike. I visited Brick Lane, I visited railway. I also joined the picket line. So I brought all this together and became a performer called Paki Pastor. Paki Pastor was the word phrase used by a policeman while beating an Asian who was on the picket and runway. And it was reported in the garden. So I picked up that notion of being a petty pastor as the basis of the program. Thank you.